What's up, folks? We got another episode of Movies in Minutes here. Another SAG-AFTRA strike update for you, talking about a few new movies this week. And this should be our last solo episode. Should have some guests lined up for the near future. We have some tweaks kind of coming to the format for the show too, which I'll explain before we head out today. But let's hop right to it. So the last time we got together, we talked about how the SAG strike was still going, but WGA had settled. SAG is still on strike. So for anybody that's not familiar with SAG, SAG is the major union for actors, right? So the actors union still being on strike. It kind of looks like we're at the farthest point we could be from settling a strike for them. It's kind of crazy. At first you see the writers kind of settle and you're like, oh, okay, well then the actors are going to be next, right? They actually walked away from negotiations last week, and they stated that there is too far a gap between what they want and what the studios are offering. So it seems like it's pointless for them to continue talking, and they ended talks, which is not good. It makes it seem like this strike could be going on for a long time. Nobody wants that, but if you can't make a deal, what are you going to do? So I think you're going to start to see at the start of the year another exodus of movies getting delayed or bumped. I just saw rumblings yesterday that Deadpool 3, which was slotted to be Marvel's big movie, for May, they always got the first weekend in May as a Marvel movie, is probably going to get bumped because the movie's only half done, according to the director. And if we're still on strike, they can't record anything else. Even if the strike ended tomorrow, there's probably no way it'd be done in time for a May date. Which means for the first time in a couple of years, probably since the start of COVID, we'd have another May with no big Marvel movie. I mean, that's kind of just like one of those things that kind of sets the tone for the spring and the summer. So it's, I don't know, it's crazy to me. And I think January, again, I tried to predict September, and September might have been too soon. I'm almost positive everything that we've got listed right now out through the rest of the year is probably going to stay where it's at. They're just going to resign themselves to get whatever promotion that they can and just put out products so they can get some kind of money. But I think January you'll see sort of like a kind of a check-in for the studios. God forbid the strikes are still going then, but if they are, a lot of stuff will have to get moved. I mean, it will be a drought for sure. So SAG aside, we had 3 movies to talk about this week. It's definitely a little bit more of a suspense horror tone for our 3 movies this week, or at least 2 out of 3 of them anyway. The first movie, which I highly recommend, even though I only rated it 3 stars out of 5, it's called The Royal Hotel. And it's about these 2 American girls who find themselves in the outback in Australia. They kind of run out of money, so they take jobs at a bar called the Royal Hotel in the middle of nowhere mining area in Australia. And it's kind of like what kind of crazy suspenseful things can happen when you're 2 single women with nothing but thirsty, for lack of a better term, men being the only people that you're interacting with. You're in the middle of nowhere, you're kind of beholden to the hotel bosses to make money, and you kind of just have to do what they tell you and deal with people you don't necessarily want to deal with, and those situations can be scary. Not to necessarily outline specific situations that they run into, but in its own way, I feel like a movie like that is scary. It's not listed as a horror film. It's like a drama suspense, and for good reason. I think I really enjoyed the film personally. It does have some issues with story and pacing and some things, but it's definitely a solid, enjoyable 3-star film. You're not, I didn't regret watching it, despite the fact that I gave it a 3. I don't think anybody else would. It is still in theaters in some places. It's kind of an art house indie movie, so you're probably not going to catch it at every theater, but it is still out there. I have checked, so that's definitely our first film for the week. Totally recommend it. The second film of the week is, what was it? Oh, When Evil Lurks. So this is for sure a horror film, and it is Spanish speaking with English subtitles, but it's really good. The tone for horror this year overall has kind of just been that, out of left field, non-American horror movies seem to be the ones that are really winning. I can't mention how many times I've said Talk to Me is my like movie of the year, and that was actually, speaking of Australia, that was an Australian-made horror film. This is probably in the top 3 now. It's not, doesn't beat out Talk to Me for me, but it is still a very well-crafted horror film. It feels a lot like the Spanish version of Evil Dead. It's got possessed ones, they call them. There's some kind of force that like kind of passes between people and then kind of drives them crazy, makes them do things, causes their bodies to become grotesque and sort of defy the laws of physics, much like the people you run into in the Evil Dead movies. And unfortunately there's no real way to fully kill or stop them. They can pass between people. There's some rules that the film gives about having to deal with these people, but unfortunately it's a lot of times, if the possessed one is somebody you care about, you're not really going to be beholden to those rules. You're going to be trying to save your loved one or not thinking clearly, and it makes for great tension in the film. The visuals are great in terms of what these people look like and what they do, and just how they manage horror and tone on the screen. This is another one that it's definitely got a wider release than the Royal Hotel, but it's still not everywhere. I saw it in an art house, but I did check Regal. Regal is offering it, so if Regal's got it, I'm sure AMC's got it, depending on where you are and what you've got access to. But if you're any kind of horror fan and you're looking for something good, there's your typical corporate horror movies out right now. You get your Saws, you get your Exorcists, and those are fine. But if you're actually a horror fan and you're looking for good horror, When Evil Lurks is the one to go for this month. At least before Five Nights at Freddy's, which I have high hopes for, but again is also sort of in that corporate horror subgenre. It's PG-13, and it's kind of it's trying to make its money off the back of a video game, so it's going to sacrifice quality horror for accessibility to the audience, which not my favorite, but hopefully it's still a good movie. But we'll get to Five Nights at Freddy's when that comes out. And what else? And When Evil Lurks is at that like 2-hour mark. Just when you're past 2 hours with horror, it kind of starts to drag. I think you can justify 2 hours. I think 90 minutes is better, but for a good story, for a good experience, I think you can go as long as 2 hours. And I think that's about where When Evil Lurks clocks in at. So that one is definitely another one I recommend. Man, we had a good batch of movies this week. I'm happy about that. I know some weeks it's like a real slog trying to convince people like, oh, you should go see this. I think these ones are all easy sells. As always, too, just a reminder, in the comments and in the description, feel free to let me know if you felt recommended to this, if you felt like this is something you wanted to see. But I also put the trailers for all these movies that we're talking about in the description, so if you're like, Nabila, I have no idea what you're talking about, check out the trailer. It might be able to sell you better than I can. So the last one is not a horror movie by any means, although this is a stretch. There's a couple of moments of like suspense and dread, but it's more like real life suspense and dread, and not nonsensical, non-realistic horror. The last movie is called She Came to Me, and it's sort of an all over the place story, but in a good way. There's a lot going on, and somehow they managed to weave a really good story, multiple stories, over. This one was only like 90 or an hour and 45 total. Somehow they managed to make that work. But it's, I'll let you decide the genre for yourself, but it's a story about Peter Dinklage as an opera composer. Peter Dinklage has a therapist that at some point off screen he married. He was having depression, writer's block. He actually still has writer's block, but he somehow managed to marry his therapist, who's Anne Hathaway. And Anne Hathaway's very, like, methodical, very, supportive. And one day, when he's got writer's block, they live in New York City, and she says to him, go, take a walk, find inspiration in an unlikely place. And he walks into a bar. He meets Marissa Tomei, who is a tugboat captain. Tugboat captain. I can't make this up. I mean, whoever wrote She Came to Me made this up, but they did a really good job. And Marissa Tomei reveals to Peter Dinklage through exploratory conversation that he has with her, which on his end is him just trying to learn about people, learn about new things, get inspiration. And I think on her end, it seems like he's hitting on her and seems interested. So she, gives him information. But she is addicted to love. Like, she has gone to love and sex therapy. She's got tendencies for stalking. She falls head over heels, to anybody willing to give her attention, which seems odd because, if you know Marissa Tomei, she's a very beautiful woman. So I'm just imagining, if you're a tugboat captain who looks like Marissa Tomei looks, and you're in various ports and places at any given time, you're probably garnering attention all the time. So one can only imagine how many, like, trysts and affairs she's had, or how many encounters she's felt are love at first sight that really weren't. But she takes him back to her tugboat, and again, it's, Peter Dinklage is so innocent at first. He's there just learning, exploring, etc. And she gets him into her bedroom, and she seduces him. She rips off her, like, tugboat dickie and has a negligee underneath, and she seduces him, and he succumbs. And he leaves her, and he tells her that, like, this was a mistake, a one-time thing, the usual. But he goes on to write a hit opera about the tugboat captain seductress who kills people. Now, granted, she doesn't actually kill people, but he takes inspiration from the experience and creates a story. And from there, it's just her becoming enamored of him, her trying to insert herself into his life, while Anne Hathaway is there and also having her own midlife crisis, wanting to choose a different vocation from being a psychiatrist to something much more modest. And she also has a son that has a girlfriend, and there's a subplot there. And all these things, as I say them, sound like a lot. But again, the creative team behind this found a way to interweave all three of these, or four of these stories, in a way that melded together perfectly. And I really liked this movie. The music was good. Some of the stuff was a little predictable, but in a good way. But other things were totally out of left field, and you're here for it. Like, you want to see these things that you don't expect, and you get kind of worried. You're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I don't know. I've left the realm of predictability, and I want to be surprised. And you get some of that, and it's really fun and really enjoyable. And this one I rated 4.5 out of 5. It only had some very minor, like, story issues that, like, there was some setup for things that there was just zero resolution on, and it was probably the type of thing that you could resolve off screen, but they started on screen, so it kind of felt like we should have seen that go full circle, and we didn't. That being said, though, this one is also in mainstream theaters. I mean, for me, I saw it in a Regal, so again, I imagine that, with all the big names attached to this is probably in a lot of the chain theaters, maybe not your small town theaters. I know my all my local theaters didn't get this, but my closest Regal did. So, but yeah, again, this one was called She Came to Me. And I just think it's a really powerful story that just doesn't quite go the way you think it's going to, and it's super, super fun. I don't know if I mentioned When Evil Lurks, just to circle back to that for a second. That one I gave 4 stars to. So we had a 3-star, a 4-star, and a 4.5 star, which I think is a great week for film watching. You know, nothing that you would be upset about watching. So, the last little thing I wanted to get into before we close out today, guys. In my descriptions, I also usually add that I review on Letterboxd too, which is like a major movie review platform. And usually, what I'll do is I'll put out my Letterboxd reviews at the same time that I publish new videos on here. We might have a little bit a little bit longer gaps between episodes because, you know, I've taken some feedback and I've talked to some people, and some of the movies that I have my guests on for to talk about, unfortunately, are films that people don't really have access to. You know, they might be a one-night only showing or something like that that's just very limited release. And while I'll continue to Letterboxd review those and share those, you know, share the links for those as a part of my videos here, I'll probably approach those less in terms of exploring them with my guests because of the fact that they're just things that, you know, people don't have access to at the time that we're talking about them. You know, everything eventually will hit streaming. You know, you can watch it at some point, but ultimately my goal here is to try to convince people to go to the theaters to see things. So it's hard to do that when I'm trying to talk to somebody about a film that they can't actually go to the theater to see. So my videos, I'm going to try to narrow to films that are more widely accessible. If it's something that I know someone somewhere can try to watch, you know, at the time that they're seeing this video, I want it to be something that we can talk about. But I don't want to tease people with things that, like, oh my god, this movie was great, oh, by the way, you can't go see it, and who knows when it'll hit streaming. But again, if you are interested in reading any of the reviews for things that we don't end up covering on the channel here, I'll continue to have my Letterboxd in my YouTube links if that's something you'd be interested in reading. So that's been our 3 movies this week, guys. Again, just to review, that was She Came to Me, When Evil Lurks, and The Royal Hotel. So all the trailers for those will be in the description. Thanks for joining me, guys, for another Movies in Minutes. I've been your friendly neighborhood comic book dude. Catch you next time.
Todas las luces se apagan si no estás aquí.